So we've got Dr Bridget Harvey, who is going to be in conversation with a group of students from the 2020 cohort. They will be looking at reflections on 2020 and what an extraordinary year this has been, and how this has perhaps altered their perspectives and approaches to their work. The students here today represent an incredible breadth and depth of approaches, research interests, practice, and future ambitions. Hand it over to you now, Dr. Bridget Harvey. Here she is.
So I posed 3 questions to this year's MA cohort about practicing through the pandemic and practicing through the climate crisis and other global events going on, and asked them to reflect on what they've learned this year and what they're taking forward in their projects and their practices going on. I think it's really important to note that actually we've not spent a lot of time physically together this year. So actually these kind of conversations are very key to understanding ourselves as a cohort, and not just as individual practices. So our virtual studio has become quite an important space for us this year. And so this is quite a apt way of discussing and celebrating ourselves as a 2020 group.
So hello, I'm Fanny Dequin, and this year has been really challenging for me because in my practice I'm working with second-hand house linen and sheets and curtains, and I used to start from sorting centres and charity organisation, and obviously I haven't been able to do that for a very long time now because of everything was shut down. And so I drastically changed that in my practice, thinking that now I'm sourcing my materials from my local community, my neighbours, and the people around me. I asked them if they had second-hand house linen that they could give me, and it really was helpful for my practice because they gave me so much interesting fabrics that I can work with, and also it's been really key to help me understand that we have a real huge need to find solution for all of those fabrics because there is a big amount of it, and nothing is done with that. And only with like 10 neighbors, I collected so many fabric, and the actual recycling system is not made to deal with that. So we need to find solution, and this is what I've been trying to do in my practice all year. And the second thing is that I completely changed the way I produce my final fabrics, because I used to work with screen printing, but obviously from home I haven't been able to access those facilities. So I found as a solution is like hand-carved stems and dye at home and stuff like that. And it's been really helpful to realize that my practice can be realized in a lot of different ways and a lot of different places really easily.
Hi everybody, I'm Shunting. Great to see you guys. So I found it very interesting. Actually, I gradually found that pandemic has contributed to a new social bubble that we are gradually get accustomed to keep in touch with our family and friends virtually. So it made me rethink about the relations with people and objects around me. So I think it happened to relate to my study practice, which is to look into emotional attachments between people through a material-based thinking. And otherwise, in the progress, I think the very limited working environment has already altered my mindset towards no matter approaches and mindsets within the context of textiles. So I managed to transform my dependence on machinery into the making by entire handcraft. So I I particularly focus on like raw materials, like wool, clay, into the entirety of my MA work. And I gradually found I'm very much willing to achieve such like kind of accidental effects as well as new ideas.
And Apurva, I think you had a relationship to, I guess, time and how we make through your practice as well. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Apurva Srihari, and my project deals with researching about how to embed seeds in textiles in order to look at encouragement and participation for users and all of us to engage in the textiles life cycle. And during this limited, during the pandemic and all the limited resources that I had kind of encouraged me to move to slow making process, really including the already available materials that I could find. Being kind of in an enclosed space took my practice towards a new context where I look at seeds as an expressive part of textile that would become a part of surrounding, in addition to being a dormant part of textiles, which was really interesting to see. So I think the limitation of resources and the space has moved and kind of encouraged me to explore that area of research, which I otherwise wouldn't have probably gone to and explored.
And Frannie, you also had a real shift of context, didn't you? You moved your practice in a very different way. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm Frannie, and my practice was based on quite a community-led project, and so the pandemic made me have to think about it in such a different way. I think I had initially envisioned it being like an in-person brick and mortar kind of clothing sharing experience, and so when that was clearly not an option, I started moving things to a social media platform and kind of working with online systems to still be able to make it a community-led project. Yeah, and I think I was quite surprised by how like unique that was and how effective that felt. Like when I mean, like human to human contact was such a thing that, I don't know, the world was lacking. I think it was kind of sweet to be doing a community-based project and still like obviously virtually, but also kind of like still being able to interact with people through my practice. Yeah, that was probably my main shift, as well as working from home, kind of like some of my other peers were saying. I think that presented yeah, a lot of challenges and just like even like creative stunt blocks. I don't know if that's a word. You can edit that out, but yeah, I think that really, like working from home really challenged me to think about how to make really well from home, like make things DIY, but also professional. And I think that that's a really good skill set that I feel like I've developed in this time to move forward with, because I don't know, we won't necessarily have like the amazing facilities that Chelsea has to offer as we move forward.
Great. Thank you. That actually feeds really nicely into my next question, which was how do you hope your practice can contribute to the environmental or social greater good kind of going forwards? And I think your discussion of waste and how to professionally address it in a low-fi or low-tech environment is actually really key. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your process, Fanny?
Yes, my practice is kind of focused like on the big picture of consumerism and textile waste, like you mentioned, and getting everyday consumers of clothes like us to really think about how to better interact with their garments, and how to better understand textile waste and like practical ways to have an impact. And so I was doing a clothing sharing kind of platform and and trying to get people behind the idea of sharing renting clothes and sharing clothes rather than buying clothes, as to minimize like the amount of textiles that are made, and the textile waste that we create by like through fast fashion and through buying things and wearing them like once or twice before we, I don't know, send them off to landfill. I'm not totally sure if I answered that very well, but
we can actually come back to it later if you suddenly think, okay, I'd like to re-answer that, we can come back to it later. Would that be good? So Alan, you your practice looked at kind of maybe more local networks or ecologies within the global picture. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you were doing and how you see these ideas?
Sure. My name's Alan Oliver. It was quite interesting for me because part of my research was really looking at local communities around the globe, quite often isolated rural communities who were engaged in very traditional forms of textile production. And quite often, in fact, nearly, entirely in every case study that I looked at, there was a real kind of synergy with the local ecologies that these communities practiced. And quite often it was really just out of necessity. The fibers that they used were from either animals or plants that had been grown locally or raised locally. The dyes that they used were from generally naturally resources that had been locally sourced. And actually even further, if you look at just the tools that they were using, to make the equipment, such as looms, spinning wheels, etc., it was also locally sourced. So it kind of really forced this kind of sort of symbiosis in a sense with their surroundings. People are forced to kind of go out into the world and engage with the seasons, engage with what's around them, because it's vital to their livelihood, really. And I suppose that made me think that this is really in conflict with how the global textile industry is run, which is very much based on a global kind of economy, where here in the UK, we want cheap, fast fashion. And so in order to do that, we can get that by exploiting, other parts of or other kind of countries, really, and people by getting them to kind of, do our work for us in a much sort of cheaper way. And I suppose it just sort of made me think, well, there has to be some sort of middle ground. And I don't think that the answer to the problems that are faced within the textile industry can be found by kind of going back in time and adopting sort of a medieval sense of purpose in terms of how we produce cloth and textiles. But I think that there are lessons to be learned from looking at that, with a kind of a change in mindset within consumers around what they're buying, how they're using it, how long they want it to last, and the focus on that locality of production is possibly a way forward, in combined with other efforts as well.
Yeah. So how has being in closed spaces or having to stay in one space affected your practice?
So earlier, before the lockdown, my practice was revolving around seeds as a dormant part of textiles, where people could engage with the fabric after a certain period of time, they could grow with it, and that textile, that piece of textiles, would become a part of a surrounding. But during the lockdown, I realized how important it is to have an interior environment that sort of encourages and builds a better state, and that kind of encouraged me to shift the context of my practice to a more dynamic way of expressing seeds as part of textiles. And that's one of the reasons I shifted my practice and research to looking at how I can improve the mental state with my practice, and how the textiles can become a part of interior environment, as well as the becoming like a part of bigger surrounding. So while I was making these green curtains, and I realized how important it is to engage with materials, engage with the just a growing dynamic thing that changes every day and sort of grows with us, and kind of has this effect that gives a really interesting and improves kind of the interior mood altogether. So that kind of inspired me to take the research in a different context.
So Ffion, your project, I'm going to start that again. You look at playfulness as part of your interest in your practice. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ffion Evans, and my practice revolves around playfulness and tactility, and I create these textile stress objects to help people, mainly people with suffering from mental health issues, but for anyone with anxiety or stress. So it's like the whole idea of having something to play with, and for the texture to be like really, those are the main things, and I personalize them because that creates like a interaction and a rich like connection between the person and the object, which then it kind of comes into sustainability, how it you shouldn't then just let go of that object because it means something to you, because it's personal to you. Over this year, I've learned so much about like all the knowledge I've learned through my practice surrounding textiles and playfulness and tactility, how important that is to mental health.
So Sephora, your work looks at sort of identity and personal histories. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Sephora Camocotelo, and for my project I decided to talk about my own history, childhood memories, because it was a way for me to question about my identity as a young woman, as a Black young woman, and it was really interesting for me because I had to research about some histories from my family that I didn't even know. And I wanted to use this way to also talk about serious and current issues in textiles, such as the waste that is created in fashion. In my case, and for my project, I was focusing on the waste that is produced during production in the luxury industry. So I reused end-of-war fabrics that was given to me in order to do a garment. And what I like is that at the end, my outcome and my garment was more than just a product, but became a strong piece and something that I wanted to communicate to an audience and show that you need to be able to not be afraid of what you are, to accept the differences that you can have, and yeah, just do what you want to do, and yeah.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Bertille, and I am working around like the link between the body and the space, and I really wanted to question the dialogue that is established between these two entities. So for that, I give to life some flexible three-dimensional textile like evolutionary textiles that were created with a modular structure. So I developed some modular units in 3D that allow my structure of my textile to be evolutive, and also to allow our object to always be malleable and answer to different function. And I also create inside this structure like a big weave that could be malleable also. So I give to this, I wanted to create like a whole universe around these elements. So for that, I create like a performance with dancers and sound designer to allow my object to be like a scenic elements. And thanks to that, it's I could imagine a total sensory universe that was collaborating and that allow me to think about objects that can have a bigger life and that can easily adapt to their context.
Fanny, can you tell us about your perspective on the role of design?
Well, I truly think that if we want change in the fashion and textile industry to go in a more sustainable way, we as designer, we need to find solution and develop solution that allows the buyers and consumer to be as easy, don't really like that term, but to be almost as easy as fast fashion.
This year was very difficult, but in a way, I learned a lot of things, such as how to be able to adapt myself with different form of studies, because it was online. So every time, so I needed to have new habits. And as well, I found it very exciting to show and to show other projects which were different from my field or my way of designing with my fellows. So it was very interesting to see other perspective of design. And also in a larger scale, I will say that it was interesting also for me personally, because I see myself as someone who come from a minority that is not really maybe present in the design field. So it was also important to say that we are able to do it and to use textile design as a way to have a presence in this.
When I came to Chelsea, I feel that, oh no, I couldn't create a new sustainable material because I know nothing about that. But I find I can use my creativity to do something. Like I made the installation and trying to communicate with the audience, and so now we have graduated and I'm going to find a new job, and I also seeking for the sustainable company because I have confidence to tell them that I have knowledge about them, and I can help them to improve their company.
So I think like this year I really discovered that I can be creative without any tools, and even if I have got this big constraint, without any profusion of raw material, I could imagine something above this, and I could create something in design with my concept, but also with little materials, and creating my own tools to be to have like what I wanted to do. And I learned that it wasn't a constraint if we haven't got nothing to create. But I also learned that how to communicate with people, because thanks to this experience, I collaborate with different people. So it was for me a way during this project to know how to express my project to different people in different fields of design or in different fields in the life. So it was important for me to express my project in different words. So I think it was a way to learn that, but also a way to learn how to communicate thanks to technology, because with the school we had to have different tools to communicate. So I think it allowed me to be more succinct in my way of communicating, because sometimes when we are like virtually, we can't have a profusion of materials. So it was really a way to be clear and to present my work with only few images. But it was also interesting to think, as a textile designer, we are always thinking about tactility and materials. So it was interesting to think how to present tactility thanks to the technology. And in my case, it was really linking with the sound, also with the other dimension of the project to develop like the way to communicate on the tactility without any materiality.
It was actually really interesting listening to Sephora talk about her project, and I too found that a lot of my work sort of was concerned with these ideas around identity, although perhaps in a slightly different way. My practice is very much concerned with sort of traditional craft practices, and through researching how those are I suppose developed and used within different communities, I really learnt that actually the physicality of those processes help to create a sense of identity, both individual and communal within the practitioners. And I think that it creates this sort of storytelling which is inherent within textiles. And sometimes it's fairly obvious because there's a sort of clear visual cultural identifying factor to it, but at other times it's far more kind of abstract. But it comes from the same place, which is this sense of belonging, a sense of identity of who you are. And I think that actually the physical practice of making, particularly in a communal way, really enhances that in a sense, perhaps in a way that the practitioner is not necessarily aware of. So I guess the short answer to what you're asking is what I became aware of is that the practice of making, the practice of using our hands, the practice of creating, particularly textiles and handmade, hand-woven, hand-printed, has enormous power actually to kind of tell stories, to create a sense of belonging, to help unite communities. And I think that actually, that's not a small thing. And I think that if we were able to harness that, enormous change could actually happen in the world.
And yeah, I've definitely learned this year that adaptability and being flexible is so important. And like your situation can change any second, as we've seen this year. So I think being able to let go of your ideas and like just change the plan if you have to sometimes can actually work out for the better. And I think it's also really important to remain creative, whatever your situation is. If you're like working from home and you can't be in a creative space like university or your studio, wherever it is, I think it's really important to push yourself, not only to get your work done, but also to keep you mentally active and like keep your mental health, like benefiting your mental health, to like keep being creative, because it's really beneficial for your mind and everything.
And the second most important thing was design thinking, and that I think is really important for us as designers, because we are essentially the starting point of whatever we create, and it's our responsibility to take every material into consideration that would kind of let us and all the users and kind of see where the materials come from and where it's going, and to really connect that in whatever we are making.
Great. So I found that really exciting. Thank you all. I think there's a real spread across from what you were saying about personal experiences and how they marry into the global experience and how we might be able to affect change. And I was also really excited to hear how many of you are addressing different waste streams and in different ways, and also using high and low tech processes, you know, and adapting your practices to the positions you find yourself in at the time. I think you've, as a cohort, have shown a huge amount of personal resilience this year in a very trying and really a series of unexpected events that have affected us all. And I'd just like to say congratulations and thank you so much for taking the time to tell us all about it.